Hi guys, I'm Tushar and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hubble. And what I wanted to talk to you today about was why we believe it's so important to pay attention to Google's hybrid workplace strategy. So last week, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google and Alphabet, formally announced Google's hybrid workplace strategy. And we believe that it's really important to pay attention because Google have actually been the revolutionaries of how and where we work for the past 20 years. With the introduction of the Googleplex in the early 2000s, Google completely flipped the concept of what an office should look like upside down. The standard office went from rows of white and grey cubicles to massive colourful campuses, nap pods, free food, slides. There was even a movie called The Internship where you kind of get to see everything in its full form. They were one of the first to acknowledge the blurring lines between work and life and truly understood that the war for talent was not just about how much people get paid, but actually the full working experience. And actually, if you think about it, pretty much every company since then has adapted their workplace to look more and more like Google's. And even brands such as WeWork have made that sort of office accessible to businesses all the way from having 1 employee to 10,000 employees. The entire flexible workspace model is really based on giving access to offices that look like Google's. And now Google are leading the charge in the next workplace revolution and trying to set the standard for what they believe a good hybrid strategy looks like. And this is huge because Google is now a 139,000 person organization worldwide and worth about $1.5 trillion in terms of market cap. Most companies are likely to follow what Google do in terms of setting the standard for hybrid workplace strategy. So in summary, Sundar Pichai in his note said that generally, he expects 60% of Googlers to be back in the office, 20% of them to be working in new Google locations, and maybe 20% working from home. Overall, what that really looks like is 3 days in the office, 2 remote. And when we're talking remote, we're not necessarily talking from home. They're talking about working in any of Google's worldwide locations, and to be able to do that with prior consent from your manager. And in addition to that, what they're saying is that Googlers will be able to work for 4 weeks from anywhere in the world. And that's an upgrade to the policy that they had before, which was 2 weeks. And so the key things to note, we think, from that announcement is that 3 days a week is actually quite a big commitment to the office. And we certainly see this as an office-first hybrid approach. This is quite different to what we've seen companies like Spotify, Twitter, Shopify announce, which are a lot more liberal in terms of where their employees can work. So this is, for Google, a really big play in terms of saying, we still really believe in the power of the office, but the amount of time people spend in the office may have come down from 5 days to 3 days. 3 days a week also limits the abilities of Google staff to move far away from their HQ. If you're commuting in 3 days a week, you kind of need to be nearby. Unless, of course, you want to choose a completely different Google location. You either want to work from there for 4 weeks during the year, or you want to actually move remotely to that particular place. Google have also said that for people who move countries, actually their compensation in their package will be adjusted accordingly. So that's something that people will really need to pay attention to. Google also used the announcement to talk about new configurations within the office, and it's really planning to invest huge amounts of money over the next 10 years to completely revolutionize all over again what the office looks like in terms of how and where people want to work, and actually allow hybrid working to become really easy and become really seamless between people who are in the office and people who are working remotely. Some of the features that Google have been talking about recently that they're going to start experimenting with in their office buildings include stuff like privacy balloons. So if you're sitting in an open plan office and all of a sudden you need to take a private call, you should be able to inflate on demand a privacy balloon in between you and your colleague that actually creates an air of physical privacy, but also audio privacy as well. They're creating semicircular meeting room concepts called Campfire, which would put office workers and remote workers on an equal footing. So you'd essentially be sitting around what looks like a campfire with multiple screens for people who are working remotely and places to sit for people who are working physically. And that actually starts to put people on an equal footing. They're also going to be experimenting with what people are calling IKEA meets Google, which is a series of modular furniture which people can essentially assemble, disassemble, configure how they want, depending on the use case of that particular piece of work. So that could be, private space for a design sprint where you can put post-its and everything else everywhere. That could be something completely different for more social activities. And Google are really making a huge bet on use cases of space changing very rapidly within the same day, and people's ability to actually change their physical environment as their activities change. So what have we seen so far in terms of the market? So, our customer base typically is small, medium-sized businesses, but increasingly larger businesses. We're seeing the full spectrum of hybrid, all the way from people wanting people in the office 4 days a week and 1 day a week sort of remote, which was actually quite the norm for a lot of businesses before, all the way up to just meeting for 4 weeks a year. But we are starting to see this 3 and 2 combination become more and more popular, where people are saying the majority of the week we want people in the office, but we're happy to grant some extra flexibility compared to pre-COVID times. And to be honest, most of these businesses will be experimenting over the year, including us, what works and what doesn't work. And sentiment is also likely to change over time. So therefore, flexibility is the name of the game and the thing that both employers and employees want over the next year, but also in the future where we work in the long to medium term. For larger corporates, they have to make decisions a lot earlier because they're dealing with many thousands of staff globally, and that can create a lot of anxiety, that can create a lot of question marks around what's going to happen. Some of those are also public companies, so they want to make sure that they're reassuring investors and the public markets in terms of what's going to happen. And they want to send a very clear signal to the market, their customers, their current employees, and maybe even future employees around what that culture is. So what you've seen is companies come out on different ends of that spectrum. Companies like Twitter, Shopify, and Spotify have talked a lot about giving maximum flexibility to their workers, maybe not necessarily going fully remote, but are giving people the option to determine where and how they work, with access to perhaps on-demand workspaces wherever those workers are in the world, or even actually reconfiguring the office space itself to make sure that it's set up for culture, collaboration, and even clients. And then on the other side, you have people like Goldman Sachs and Netflix, whose CEOs have come out and publicly said that they will issue a recall to the office as soon as possible. They expect people to be back in, and that's the only way that they feel that work can really be done properly. And what Google have done is that they've placed themselves firmly in the middle in terms of saying, we do value the office. We expect people in general to come in 3 days a week, but we also do value flexibility and people being able to work remotely, either from where they typically live or anywhere around the world. And they know that that's a great strategy in terms of retaining and hiring talent, because they're now in a war for talent, not just with other big tech companies, but all other companies who are embracing more and more flexibility and remote and hybrid working cultures. So in summary, we think everyone should pay attention to what Google is saying. Google has led the workplace revolution for the last 20 years, and we expect that many large corporates and many companies will follow what they do now as more and more companies start to set the standard of what they expect hybrid working to be in the future. And inevitably, more and more companies will follow the 3 and 2. The 3 and 2 tends to make sense. It's what we're hearing a lot of at the moment. And remember that the 2 doesn't necessarily mean working from home. It can be working from co-working spaces near people's homes. It can be working from inspirational spaces the day you need to do a creative brainstorm. It can be working from abroad. And more companies are following that lead. And the fact that Google has actually firmly planted their flag in 3 and 2 will mean that many other companies will follow too. If you need help in figuring out what your back to work policy should be, we put together an 8-step guide called Back to the Future of Work. And that will help you figure out how you should be speaking to your team, how you should be assessing your current workplace setup, and how you should be experimenting and figuring out what your team may need in the future. The answer is not going to be clear cut for most companies. It's going to revolve around a huge amount of experimentation to see what people want. But fundamentally, what we believe is that if you are a flexible employer and you're giving your employees what they need, what they want, and a lot of autonomy over how they work, you're inevitably going to win that war for talent too. I'm Tushar, and I'm the co-founder of Hubble. Thank you very much.